Welcome to the November 6th regular meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Madam Clerk, may I ask you to call a roll, please?
1 second. There you go. Mayor Rilling,
Present.
Mr. Abrams,
Here.
Mr. Constant,
Here.
Mr. Gilleret,
Here.
Mr. Gasimis,
Here.
Miss Yang.
Here.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Before we get into tonight's agenda, so I don't screw this up as I often do, Mr. Mayor, any opening remarks before we get into our agenda?
No, the most significant item on the agenda tonight is an amount from a capital appropriation for $14 million plus. Hard to believe over the many years that some of our schools still do not have air conditioning, and the state of Connecticut has a grant program, and we're applying to that grant program so we can put air conditioning in the rest of the schools. And it's something that's been should have been coming for quite some time, but hopefully it'll get done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. All right, our first item of business tonight is approval of the minutes from our October 2nd meeting. Can I get someone to move that item, please?
So move.
Thank you very much, Kendrick. Any changes, amendments, additions, revisions to the minutes as presented in our package this evening?
I have no comments.
Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes from our October 2nd meeting, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstention.
Thank you, Artie. You weren't at the last meeting. All right, the minutes from the October 2nd meeting are approved. There are no special appropriations in section A of this evening's meeting. So we can move directly to the transfer agenda, section B, beginning on slide 8 of our package. Can I get somebody to move the transfers for discussion, please?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Artie. All right. Tom, do you want to lead us through the proposed transfer?
Yeah, sure. It's a big contingency night. Five of our 6 transfer requests are coming from contingency. And just to give you all a review of where we stand on the contingency, we started the year with $1.5 million. After the first 3 months of the year, we have approved transfers of $152,000. So we have about $1.35 million or $1,350,000 remaining. If we approve all of the contingency requests tonight, which total $617,000, we will still have $730,000 remaining for the rest of the year. That's where
Just again, there's really no point of comparison because we said this year as part of our budget setting process, we wanted more people to come back and take things out of contingency rather than leave them in their budget. But from the Office of Finance, you and Henry, are you comfortable with virtually half of the contingency gone in less than 6 months of the fiscal year?
I haven't seen it before in my time, but I will say that there is a significant request tonight, almost $500,000, which I don't expect to repeat through the rest of the year, barring any sort of major incident. Normally it's, I'm looking at the historical ones we've approved. It's 40 here, it's 50 there, it's 60 here. We can sustain that type of request activity for the balance of the year. But yeah, if we have another $500,000 hit, we'll it may be a challenge, but in that case, then it's a special appropriation request, not a special capital appropriation, but basically going back to the rainy day fund to get more funds. So fingers crossed that we won't have that type of request.
Yeah, I'll add 2 cents. I think that contingency is there for these eventualities. Sometimes they come early in the year, sometimes they come late in the year. the reality is if they're needed, they're needed. But, it's pay me now, pay me later. If we use it up, then we don't have it later. But for right now, these are worthy ones, the ones that we have listed today. We need the operations, we need the services, we need the funding. I think as we get into the spring, we may be faced with issues where people need some money and it may be a little bit harder. But I've been here 4.5 years. I've never seen the contingency depleted. So if you give it out now, you'll just have less for the future. So I think it's okay, Ed, but you just don't want to make it a habit, that type of thing.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, thank you for the context. It's helpful.
You're welcome.
All right.
Right, so the first one is actually in the legislative area, which is where all the charges for the city charter rewrite took place. I know we've been to the well here a couple times, both last year and earlier this year for that. So this should just about wrap it up. As you know, the community will be voting on the charter, the new proposed charter tomorrow. But the total request is for 27,600, broken out. Advertising, this one sort of surprised me, but it's $23,000 to put the revised charter into the Norwalk Hour.
Mhm.
And as much as high as that sounds, it started out at 30,000. So we did we conducted some negotiations to bring that down, because we basically keep them in business with all of our public announcements. And then printing and duplication, assuming that it's approved tomorrow, there'll be binders, hard copies available for the public. And then finally, the last 10 hours for Attorney Mednick, who has been nursing this along throughout the entire process. He should be wrapping up next month with his final invoice. And one thing Tom Livingston and I had talked about is that, again, assuming that it gets approved, that going forward, there's been some talk about having a city charter commission. And if that indeed does take place or come to fruition, then we will probably need some further assistance from Attorney Mednick throughout that process as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Please, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, I can't stress strongly enough how important it is to the city of Norwalk, and hopefully tomorrow the voters will pass that charter revision. It doesn't really do much of anything other than organizing the charter to make it more readable. Before, everything was kind of disjointed. There were different things about council in this section, different things about council in that section. Same thing with the mayor's office, same thing with all the boards and commissions. Now we've organized it into a very readable document with very few changes. The only two changes that the major changes were the fire commission and the police commission go from 3 to 5 members, or if you take the mayor's position out, goes from 2 to 4. So it's really critical, and hopefully we'll pass this special this transfer, but also hopefully the charter revision will pass tomorrow. A lot of hard work went into it. It's so much more readable, and I'm really pleased with what the Charter Revision Commission presented.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Questions about this proposed transfer? Okay. So we move
Right.
to building management?
Yeah, again, as normal, Ed, we'll vote on all of these together at the end. Yeah.
Correct.
So the next one is building management. I know we have Alan Lowe on the line to speak to the HVAC grant that the mayor referred to earlier, but in terms of transfers from contingency, we have 2 renovations that they're requesting funds for. One was in the mayor's office for new doors and walls for a total of $7,000. And then the second one is for the customer service area for $75,000. So as you walk into City Hall, the window on the right, your first greeter that points you in the right direction and so on, that's the customer service main area. But the other individuals who are not manning that window sit up on the second floor, just outside of the Public Works area. And Public Works is bursting at the seams, so they need some space. But we also thought we would take advantage of this opportunity to bring the whole customer service team back together, centrally located on the first floor. So this $75,000 is to, again, build cubicles, put in fire sprinkler heads where necessary, excuse me, update the electricity as necessary, so on and so forth. So those two total $82,000, and that would go into building management for the city hall account.
Okay, questions, comments?
I just have one sort of procedural comment. I'm assuming that any monies now that get moved from contingency into someone's budget, when we review the results, their actuals versus what they've requested in the budgeting process next time, it reflects what's being added, what will have been added from contingency. Is that correct?
Yeah, we start with the approved / adopted amount of, let's say if it's $100, somebody comes to contingency, asks for 25, there's a column for transfers or adjustments, and then they are then left with what we call the revised budget. But as we get into the budget season and we talk about percentage increases year over year, it's the request or the recommended versus the original adopted amount, not the revised amount.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
I just, any other questions about this one before I raise mine? Two questions here, right? I understand the need, but again, in the spirit of we're taking a much bigger chunk out of contingency this year than we have in the past, as was our plan. When would the work begin and end on an effort like this?
Good evening, Alan. We have get fee proposal from contractors already, so we will be able to engage the contractors probably in about 2 to 3 weeks. The work will probably takes about 2 weeks to do. We got to tear down walls and stuff. It's right now the space really is just block walls. So there's a hallway there. We're gonna get rid of the hallway and all. So I think it's about 2 to 3 weeks again. So total project would take about 2 months.
And if we were to say, Alan, just based on wanting to see how much of what our burn rate on contingency is on other requests over the next month or two before we were to approve this, would contractors still be available at that time? Would we still be able to keep to that timeline?
Yes, I think it would take about 2 months from the time that the board estimate approve a transfer. So, okay.
Okay, just to my fellow board members, I'm just wondering if we suggest that we delay this and revisit it in a couple months to see if there's any other significant requests to contingency. We don't have to do that. Obviously, as we said at the beginning, after this, there'll still be roughly $700,000 in our contingency budget. But if we're concerned about the burn rate on contingency, this could be something we could delay. Just for consideration.
Mr. Chairman, I looked at the requests and all of them seem legitimate. And I believe Mr. Dakowitz and Mr. Ellis feel comfortable that perhaps we're not going to burn out the contingency. I don't see it happening because this is not something that's happened before, but there are some really critical things in here, but I don't know if any of them are time sensitive. But I'd like to see us move forward on this and then work through it if there's other contingency items that come forward.
Understood, Mr. Mayor. Again, I just raise it for consideration.
No,
And
I agree.
also reminding us that we expect to see many more requests for contingency this year than we have in the past, given how strict we were in budget setting at the beginning of the year.
May I make a comment?
Yes, Tom.
Thank you. I just want to point out that we did just hire a third customer service representative, and one of the advantages of moving it downstairs is they'd all be together, including our newest member. It really will improve the customer service experience by the residents, having one place to go. All of our reps will be there and be there throughout the day, as opposed to now we switch off when some lunch and the like. So I won't say it's like a do or die, but it is a big asset, I think, to the public.
Ed, can I add one more item? We've had problems in the past with capital projects where they got delayed or there was supply chain problems, and then monies had to be rolled over from operating budget surpluses. I would just say if the BET determines that these are valid, that we should give the money, get it going. Delays just creep into everything that the city does, especially through purchasing and requisitions. So I would advocate that if you think it's important, let's go forward and we'll manage the contingency as the later items come up in the spring. That would be my my gut feeling. Because if I understand what you're trying to do, you want to have it's like the budget. You want to see all the requests at one time, and then you can prioritize. But the way the world works, these are the first ones. They're all good, and hopefully we won't have a big influx in the spring where we have those problems.
Understood. And again, I raised it for consideration, not as a suggested or mandatory point of view in any way, shape, or form.
Yep.
I have a question, and it might have been answered before, but if contingency funds aren't used, do they roll over into the new year?
They
No,
move into the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
no, they're part of what happens is we do a profit and loss, and we have a surplus or a deficit. If there's a surplus, it goes into our reserves. If we have a rollover, we take some of those funds, which really would hit a rainy day fund, and we allocate it to next year's budget. But the way the world works, everything in our operating budget is for that 1 year only. The only things that roll over are capital projects, which by definition are for greater than 1 year's service.
Okay, because my concern is like, are different department heads just going to tap into contingency because it's only available for this year?
Well, what tends to happen is we set up contingency in every operating budget. So it's there, we use it as necessary. As I've said, 4 or 5 years I've been here, we've never tapped out. And, you know, there are other sources of funding that we have. We've had COVID funds, we had ARPA funds. As we get to the end of the year, we see that certain line items in certain departments are running surpluses. So instead of funding it through contingency, we may be able to fund it from a different line item.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just say, I think Ed's comment is a worthy comment and something to keep in mind. However, I do think this project is a worthy project to make the customer experience be better when someone comes to City Hall and they're able to find answers more readily.
Yep.
So, and I think 75,000 relative to what we're going to talk about next is relatively small.
Good point. Good point. Troy?
Ed, yeah, I thinking of your comments, I think there's something to be said there. This is very early to be going this deep in my 5 years. And I think maybe if you could push it off maybe a couple of months, I think that would make sense in this case. It's not urgent like the other item coming up. But I see your point there and I could support that.
Again, it goes both ways. So if Henry and Tom are confident that with the remaining $700,000 in contingency, we can very likely manage to that for the full year, then we should continue to move forward with approving things that make sense. I
Mr.
just
Chairman,
wanted to exercise that again, given that we're not even 6 months through the year and we're at 50% of our contingency spent.
I was much more
Chairman?
concerned with the earlier transfers in July and August.
Mhm.
Okay, we had just finished the budget and people are moving things out of contingency.
Yeah.
So as the year goes on, I become more and more amenable. I'm sorry if I cut someone off.
Mr. Mayor?
yeah, I would say if we're going to table any of them, I think we should separate out each one rather than the entire request, because there may be some that are much more urgent than others. For instance, for printing and duplication and advertising for the charter revision. Those are things that are due now. So I don't think we can have the luxury of tabling them for a couple of months.
No, we would,
Things
if,
too.
if we so choose, we will break it out. But again, I asked the question more to exercise it. I will personally take the recommendation of our finance team and Henry and Tom and you know, we'll just watch it as we continue to move through the year. But I think exercising it was worthy of 10 minutes of discussion.
Yeah, and yeah, my point of clarification would be, I would just be looking at that one item of the 75,000 that I would look to extend, but if that's not the case for everyone, I could move forward.
I think I'm in the same place you are, Troy. All right, shall we move to the next item, Tom?
Yeah, no, but just to follow back to Kendrick, just so you know, we normally start the operating budget process with 1.5 million every year for contingency, and as Henry mentioned, yet to be depleted. So that's you can expect that and perhaps more this year for reasons we will discuss later. But anyway, the next one is the police department, school resource officer overtime. The request is for $475,000. This is something we did last year, and we have been asked to continue the same level of support in the schools. We have Chief Walsh and Deputy Chief Evans Lepore on the line to discuss and answer any follow-up questions. Go ahead, Chief.
Good evening, board members. Post the Uvalde tragedy in May of 2022, the police department was tasked by the city to provide police protection at every single Norwalk Public Schools building. And we did that till the end of the school year in June of 2022. At the beginning of the school year, in September of 2022, we had set up an agreement with Norwalk Public Schools to provide 5 full-time 8-hour hires a day, 1 at each high school and 3 others that are assigned geographically, and they rotate in between schools. So that's 40 hours a day in overtime. So that had gone all the way through, and we were doing those security hires, and we were advised in May of 2023 that Norwalk Public Schools did not have the funds to pay for these security hires. And so thus, through this board and through Henry, we transferred $325,000 out of our operating budget to cover these school security hires from last year's budget to cover the deficit in last year's school security that ended in June of 2023. At the beginning of this school year, we were advised to continue the school security hires at 5 a day at the same pace that we were doing last year. So that's average 40 hours a day to a tune of about, throughout the whole school year, it's going to cost approximately $430,000 to cover all the overtime. So this was an unfunded thing that we had no idea that we were going to be able to, we didn't have the opportunity to plan for it in last budget season. And we are still tasked to do it. And that is why we're going to this board for the special contingency to cover the overtime for the rest of the school year.
I have a
Thank you,
couple,
Chief. Questions or comments for the chief?
I have a couple of questions. Oh, sorry.
Artie?
No, Ann, go ahead, Ann.
Okay. First, if it wasn't covered by overtime, what would the cost be if you were fully staffed for this?
We are fully staffed police department, but
But
if I take 5 more officers out of patrol at our rate of hiring with workman's comp, sick time, vacation, and compensatory time, I would just be paying overtime in patrol. So if I reduce on one end to staff these hires full time, there'll be overtime charges in another division.
Yeah, I think the alternative, Ann, is that he would need 5 new heads, which come with a tremendous overhead burden.
I think that's Ann's question, though, is the incremental 5 head count greater than $475,000, equal to or less than?
Could you repeat that, please?
If you were to be given approval to hire 5 additional head count, is that cost greater than, less than, or equal to $475,000?
It's much higher than $429,000.
Right. They'd have to have benefits. They'd have to, we have FICA and all the other things that go along with it. If you have a fully staffed department, the chief can determine where he needs to hire overtime rather than just putting people in that are going to work 37 and a half hours a week and they have to work in a certain position.
And if it's new hires, they have to go through training
Right.
where we pay them while they're going through the academy. So the cost of adding 5 heads is much higher than overtime just for these 5.
And I think that answers your question, yes?
Yes, my second
Got it.
question is, why is this coming out of the city's budget and not, at least in part, from the school budget?
Tom, you might want to answer that.
Me? Well, several reasons. One, the school system, we're not allowed to tell the school how to spend their money. So if they have something like this that comes along and they didn't put it into their budget, they don't, as far as I know, they don't have a contingency account similar to the city side. But the other component here is, are you familiar with the MBR minimum budget request, Ann?
Yes.
Yeah,
and
so if they put in a request for an additional 500 grand, to pay for the police officers overtime in 1 year, then we're basically stuck with that every year.
I know, I understand,
Yeah.
but
So maybe I've misunderstood. Did not the school system already pay this and we're kind of reimbursing them?
No,
No, last year, the public schools reached out to us in May, and they said that I guess there was a huge deficit. They had not paid the bill. They had not paid the security bill to roll call all year. So we transferred 325 then.
Okay.
They covered from September through November of last year. And then from November on of last year, they didn't pay the bill. And then we transferred 325 from our operating budget that we had left to cover that bill. And we were still tasked to continue those security hires starting this past
And that was
September.
where
We haven't been doing that.
that's where it was supposed to come from the police department budget. Am I correct?
That was to cover last year's bill.
Right. Exactly.
Yes, it did. And then starting in September, it's been unfunded and all public schools doesn't have the money to cover it, but we're still providing the security. And we did not budget for this last October when we prepared this year's budget because we didn't know. We were unaware of this.
An issue then.
Yes.
I would just say that the Norwood Public Schools has a pretty healthy budget. And if they are making this request, that maybe they should find some monies in their budget to try to cover this cost, and it's not coming 100% out of the city's contingent.
I will amplify Ann's comment, given that the Norwalk Public Schools regularly rolls over a few $1 million a year. So the ability for them to cover this within the existing funding without increasing the MBR certainly is proven to exist based on history. Artie.
Yeah, when I was on the Board of Ed, that's exactly what we did. We reimbursed the city from the rollover. So all the SROs were funded by the Norwalk. First, it was funded by the police department, and then we reimbursed them at the end of the year. So I think that's what, this way did not affect the MBR. We didn't have a budget line item, with the Norwalk Public Schools, but we just reimbursed them at the end of the year.
Also, I want to mention that I know historically, Artie, or I forget who said it, Ed, the public schools rollover has been in the millions. Recall that last month it was 400, I want to say 424, significantly.
Yeah, I was going to say it's lower. It was lower last year. This year,
Considerably lower than it has been in historically.
But they should share in the burden, I think.
I would actually suggest that someone, Tom or Henry or both, go back to Norwalk Public Schools and the school district and say, look, this is for you. You've requested it. Find the money in your budget. And this way it's not taking up over 30% of the city's annual contingency.
Chief, can I ask a question? This was security that we provided as a city, am I correct? They did not request this,
Last year they did.
but what about this money here?
This year, when I spoke to the public safety director, he more or less told me that the security was still needed, but he was upfront and he said they don't have he said that this was unbudgeted, but they more or less said at the same time that the security was needed.
We get a lot of requests from the public from the Board of Ed, quite frankly, to provide security for the schools because of all the things that have been happening, not only with the school violence, but with the violence throughout the world and different things happening. We have felt that it was in our best interest to be proactive in providing security for the schools. I believe the chief has a roving patrol kind of an approach, Chief, am I correct?
Yes, there's one full-time at each high school. They do not move. And then we made geographical post of a combination of the elementary and middle schools. And then there's an officer assigned to that. And then they rotate in between each school. And then as they rotate, they signal out on the radio so that we know that they're there. So they do go from school to school in their geographical district.
It's
Mr. Mayor, Chief,
kind of
I
like
don't,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't believe, Mr. Mayor, Chief, that anyone here is arguing with the need and with the value that is presented here and with the work that Chief and the staff do. And I also believe at the end of the day, Chief, none of us are going to leave you hanging with this type of burden in a budget. However, again, will amplify Ann's suggestion that before we approve this, there needs to be a conversation with the Board of Education to negotiate some type of contribution on their behalf, right? They answer at the end of that, maybe there is no money to be had, but that conversation should take place. And as a result, I would recommend that we delay this decision, and that will mean we'll have to go back and amend our motion and break the approvals apart until that conversation can be had, and we bring it back after that conversation has been had. Again, Chief, nobody's going to leave you hanging on this. This is not your problem, but it deserves a conversation with the Board of Education before we simply say, we've got this covered. And again, it's not about the importance of the service. Everyone recognizes that.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree with that 110%. Yeah, obviously the police department should not stop doing what they're doing, of course. If we delay this, we'll just have to deal with, like you said, we'll have to deal with any bills that come as a result of it. The other thing I was a little concerned about is that you mentioned, I mean, there's 12 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, and you said that the 2 full-time will be at the high school, if you're counting Brigg, I don't know, so we'll say 2 full-time. So you're leaving 3 officers to roam between the 12 elementary and the 4 middle schools, is that correct, or?
You have to equate the 6 SROs also. So these are just security hires. So the school resource officers are also out there. So these are security hires just to maintain security as a huge presence outside the school in a marked vehicle. They're always driving around checking the parking lots. There are 6 SROs also assigned also. I see your point, but if you take that variable also of the 6 SROs, which are full time, we have it covered.
But is the presence, like when trouble happens, obviously you see a police car sitting in front of each one of the schools. The SROs, you won't see that physical presence. I'm just concerned that, opportunities, the people don't see a presence there. And if people are roaming, that's kind of concerning a little.
There are 21 school buildings, and we do our best with what we have. Considering that the need in the other divisions, I have to make decisions on in regards to traffic and narcotics enforcement, investigations, and patrol. That would take a broader discussion of increasing our budgeted manpower to supply more people to the schools.
No, I know. The SROs are internal though, right? I mean, you do not see them if you drive by a school. Is that fair to say?
You will see their car parked outside. They usually
There will be a
park in-
patrol car outside?
Yeah, they take marked patrol cars. Every SRO has a
Okay.
marked patrol car, and so you'll see that prominently parked outside. And they teach DARE, and they sit in on meetings, and they're always with the kids in and out of the cafeterias or doing events.
Okay.
So they're there, but and
All
they
right,
all
now-
have marked police cars.
Okay, you're the, it's your world there. I just felt that the presence is important, I think. Okay,
So noted. Thank you, Troy. All right, so based on this discussion, I would like to move that we amend our conversation about the transfer items to discuss them singularly, but then to vote on each transfer item individually. Can I get
I
an
second that.
approval of that? Thank you. All right, so thank you, Chief. Tom, do we want to move to the fire department?
Yeah, so as we've seen previously, same old supply chain and inflation, especially as it relates to the vehicles. In this case, the engine number 2, and I believe we have Mark Conti on the line, and I see him coming up, and there he is to discuss this one. So this one is for $33,000. Mark, take it away.
Mr. Mayor, so basically this is engine 2. This is our busiest engine company. It's in out of Connecticut Avenue. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. We gave you the diagnostics. The engine needs to be rebuilt. This is the hardest working engine that we have right now. It's running over 3,000 calls a year. We've been maintaining it, and it obviously developed some issues in it. And what ends up happening with an engine like that is it's starting on, it's off. That's the one thing about fire trucks is diesel engines are on and off, and then they're running. Our best assumption is this probably little things occurred. We've had a pretty busy couple of years of fires, and this was probably pumping a fire. Things got a little hot under it, and it probably started making a little. What ends up happening is you'll get a little bit of tears in the lining, and it turned into when we brought it over to Cummins Diesel, they said they recommended us to rebuild it. We are like Tom said, with supply chain issues. We are still waiting on our approved engines. We haven't even gotten a pre-build meeting yet, and they're telling us it's 3 years for 2 new engines after a pre-build meeting. It's which is, just to put it in reference, we used to be able to, when we used to get budgeted for our new apparatus, we would get approved. We'd go out to bid, get a pre-build meeting within that month, and have a new piece of apparatus within a year. So this has drastically changed everything. And what we're doing now is we are just repairing a lot of our equipment. And this is we only have a few spares left at this point. So this is absolutely crucial for us to get this engine back on the road.
Ann?
If this is taken offline, do you have sufficient equipment to back it up? And does that beg the question that if I guess the question is, do you need more?
Well, it's currently offline because we can't drive it. We have it's in the Bronx at Cummins Diesel. It has to be rebuilt or else we can't drive it. So it's being right now. Engine 2 it's our newest spare, but they're driving. That's a 2001. And we have 2 other re-chassis, but we have been maintaining them and keeping them on the road. But the goal is, once we get these 2 new engines to come in, the engine 2 will become, we basically put them down the line. It'll go into the slower companies. It'll go, all the busier companies go to the slower companies down the line. But right now, yeah, it's a struggle. Engine 2 is a spare, right now it's a full-time spare operating, and we only have 2 older spares, and our older spares are re-chassis. Basically what we did is we took the bodies and the pumps off of older engines and we put them on newer ones. They're about 2002s, 2003s. And so that's really the state of the, unfortunately, it's the whole industry. So that's the state of the department right now. And we're just trying to get these engines. We're trying to push the new engines to come in, and we'll have some, even a few newer spares. But we're definitely bare bones right now as far as apparatus, extra apparatus. And this one was unexpected. This was usually when these happen, they're catastrophic like that, and that's exactly what occurred. It was one day that all of a sudden it was a shutdown engine, and we found out we're no longer driving it until it gets fixed.
Yeah, am I looking at the mileage on those pages correctly? The engine has 51,293 miles. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that under some type of warranty? We were talking about a $200,000 warranty last month.
So that basically the way that warrant that was or 2 years.
Right.
That's all they'll do.
I'll take the 200,000 anytime.
Yeah, so would we. But no, that's not something that they're interested in. This engine was built in 2015, 2016 is where this engine was built, when this was built. But yeah, it is unfortunately that's the situation with the way the engines are. There's a lot more computers, and that's becoming a lot more of a problem, and we're noticing that, and there's a lot more maintenance on these, and it seems to be the days of the older engines that would when I got on the job in 2001, we had 1970s and 1980s that were still working great. But those are older engines. This is a newer type engine with the computers, and this is how they run.
So is 51,000 miles considered a lot, a little for a 6-year-old? I mean, you said 2015 is.
I'd say it's definitely a little. It's not as we would definitely like to get more. Again, it also depends on an engine. Engines are they're all built one by one. So some of them are, we have another, to put it in perspective, we had 2 engines built at the same year. This isn't happening to the other one. This could just be an issue with the engine underlying. The way they explained it to us is that's what ends up happening a lot to these engines. Because again, they're the biggest thing with the fire truck compared to, even a contractor, is they're starting up a diesel engine and they're letting it warm up for a certain amount of time, 20 minutes, a half hour, then they're driving it all day. We don't have that luxury. Our trucks turn on and off, and they're instant. And that's the hardest part of maintaining a diesel engine in a fire truck, I would say.
Well, maybe a closer look at it. If this starts to get common, maybe a warranty or a extended some type of, 51,000 miles. Sounds very light.
Yeah.
I think we just have to remember it's all around town, and to Mark's point, it is start, stop. It's still 2016, so it is still an 8-year-old engine.
Mm-hmm.
So understood. Any other questions for Mark? Thank you, Mark. Tom, shall we move to Rex and Park?
Thank you.
Yes, our final transfer, not related to contingency. It's a interdepartmental amongst the Rec and Park community. And I see that we have Ken Hughes and Robert Stowers on the line to discuss this one. Take it away, fellas.
I'll let Ken start off.
Hi, good evening, Mayor, members of the board. What we're doing is we're consolidating some of our part-time accounts. You can see we're taking wages and salaries from a few of our part-time accounts and bringing them over to others. So this is more a consolidation of our accounts as opposed to, taking from contingency. So it's a relatively basic transfer.
Thank you. Questions for Ken and Robert? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, given how I amended the motion, I would like to suggest we now go ahead and vote, roll by roll. All in favor of approving the legislative transfers in the amount of $27,600 signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That transfer is approved. The building management transfer in the amount of $82,000. All in favor? Opposed? Abstention? That is approved. I would like to suggest that we delay a vote on the police department transfer until such time that the finance department has had the opportunity to speak to the Board of Education. Is that something that all agree with?
I'm opposed to that.
Okay,
Well, I approve. Well, what is the vote? All opposed?
Why don't you call the
for-
vote?
who's,
I-
let's do
Ed-
this. Who's in favor of delaying the discussion until after the conversation with the Board of Ed? Who's opposed to that?
I am.
I am. Ed, it's the optics is really bad on this. This is public safety, school safety.
I understand that, Artie, and I continue to say we are not going to fund this. This will get funded.
Yeah, but they need it now. I mean, what are we talking about? A month, 2 months? I just think it looks really bad. God forbid something happens and this vote comes out.
It's fair word. Go ahead, Ann.
If they were able to go through the whole year, maybe we can amend the motion that this continues to be funded. But they went through the whole year, and the top up came at the end of the year. So they were able to wait, and the services still occurred. So if the motion includes language that this service will still be continued, and the question is just what pocket of money this comes from. So I agree wholeheartedly. We have to continue the service. It's incredibly important, but I think we have the opportunity for it to be funded, at least shared with the school's budget, to your point about having the rollover. So I don't know if you want to amend the motion.
I'm happy to amend the motion to suggest to state that services will continue to be provided.
Right.
Funding will be provided. However, before allocating 100% out of contingency, we want there to be a conversation with the Board of Education about some contribution on their behalf. Can I even make a motion like that?
I don't think that's under our jurisdiction.
That's what I wondered. We're kind of
Mr. Chairman.
binary in what's our jurisdiction, aren't
Yeah.
we?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
I don't believe the Norwalk public school system or any public school system is in the business of public safety. I think that's the responsibility of the police and fire departments. We wouldn't ask if they had a fire at one of the schools that they pay for part of the service. This is something that we have felt was necessary to protect the schools, make sure that the students feel comfortable, the parents feel comfortable, that we're trying to do everything we can to prevent an incident like we've seen in other places. And that's just my opinion that, this money was, I believe, and Chief Walsh is still here, but I believe this money was charged to the school system as opposed to the police department, and it's kind of like a reimbursement. But I may be thinking of something else.
Oh, so are you saying that?
Can you clarify that? So is that the facts?
Well, the chief can talk about that. There was something that was billed to the school system that should not have been billed to the school system, and I'm not sure if this is the same thing.
Chief, are you still on the line?
He's still in attendance, just on mute and no video. Chief Walsh, are you there? Melissa, any chance you could talk to this?
He may have felt he was all finished, but he may have walked away from his computer. I'm sure he's still there.
I mean, look, there's no question, right? Our role is binary, approve or non-approve funding, right? There is no question this is something that needs to be funded for the benefit of the community. Recognizing where we are, perhaps I can put a different amended motion in place. And that is, I move that we approve this funding as requested, but note our strong disappointment in the Board of Education for failing to help support this need. I don't even know if I can do that because that's more than just a binary motion.
May I suggest the following, that we approve it, and it's subject to a discussion between the city and the Board of Education as to which pocket it gets funded from.
I just texted the chief, Mr. Abrams. He'll be back on in a sec.
Thank you.
Mr. Abrams, I'm back. I stepped away for a minute.
Chief, while you were gone, there was a question from the mayor about whether this item was misbilled to begin with. If this was, and Mr. Mayor, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if this was billed to the Board of Education and should not have been.
Yeah, I'm there was something that was billed to the Board of Ed that should have been the police department. I'm not sure if this is the same item, but the chief can probably clarify that.
There were some things last year when we audited, but the large amount was the security hires. It was a very minor one. Myself and Mr. Dossman went through that. There was some other SRO related and game, a football game. There was some other stuff. If I can't recall this time, but there were a few items that were misbilled. But the significant amount that we lent them last year was for all the school security hires, the ones that we're discussing this evening.
So, Chief, this money is mainly to continue providing security for our facilities, our school facilities?
Yes, sir. That's all.
Okay.
So in the past, historically, has that amount come from Board of Ed or from was it always available within the police budget?
Prior to Uvalde, Norwalk Public Schools hired 2 4-hour hires a day, which came out of their budget as a total of 8 hours a day. And then it was increased last school year, at the beginning of last school year, to 40 hours. And there was an agreement and discussion then that they would pay for it. It was paid for by Norwalk Public Schools through November of 2022. And then from November 2022 forward, they advised us in May that the funds were not available to pay for the security funding that we had, the security hires that we had already implemented. So that money came out of last year's operating budget. We paid the bill to the comptroller's office out of that after working with Mr. Dashowitz in town. So we continued the same security protocols this year, beginning this past September, and we've been ongoing. And then I had a discussion with Mickey a couple weeks ago. I'm like, this money, we realize that Norwalk Public Schools is not going to pay for it. So that's what started this process right now. So we did the estimates of how much it would cost to cover these hires for the rest of the year. And it was approximately $430,000.
So let me try.
If I could just
Go ahead, Mr.
ask
Mayor.
you to clarify. They did not request this. This is something that the police department, you and I have had discussions along with the commission about the things we need to do to protect our Norwalk Public Schools. They did not request this coverage. We're providing it because we feel it's necessary. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's a helpful piece of context. So let me try and amend the motion one more time. I move that we approve this line item with the request that a subsequent conversation take place between the Finance Department and the Board of Education to determine if there is any available funding within the Board of Education to help support this cost. Does that
You can
sit
move
well with everyone?
I think
I will move that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With that moved, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. Thank you for the discussion. Thanks for working through this as a team. I appreciate it. And Artie, thank you for challenging us again.
You're welcome.
The fire department movement of $33,000 from contingency motor vehicle parts. All in favor? Signify by saying aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That's
I'm in favor.
approved. And finally, the Rex and Park transfer from wage and salary temp to wage and salary part-time. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That is approved. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes section B, the transfers. Moving to the next part of our agenda is item 4, other business. There is a resolution on the table. Madam Clerk, may I get you to please read the resolution into the record?
Resolution requesting a special capital appropriation from Buildings and Facilities Department relating to Connecticut State HVAC grant application in the amount of $14,360,306 for multiple Norwalk Public Schools.
Thank you. And I believe, Alan, you're going to speak on this resolution. Is that correct?
Yes, I will. Unless Tom wants to introduce the item first, or should I just speak?
Actually, let me move the item for discussion and vote. Can I get
I'll move it.
Thank you. Okay, Alan, Tom, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the mayor touched on this in his opening remarks, but, Alan, you can take it from here.
Thanks, buddy. This is a very, very unique request. It's a substantial amount of money. We recognize this. I've been working with Norwalk Public School on this for probably around 5 months or so. It's a very unique request for the public that are listening to this conversation. HVAC means heating, ventilation, air conditioning. So it's about mechanical system. So from the state's perspective, when a community, whether it's Norwalk or other community in the state, when they repair existing equipment, let's say a boiler or air conditioning system, after 20 year, 25 year, whatever it may be, it's not reimbursable. So the city or the community, the district would have to pay the money 100% and do replacement. Some of the things that are reimbursable are like building a new school, renovate new, roofing, windows, and the environmental remediation, generally speaking, are reimbursable. When you get to fixing existing heating units and air conditioning, it's not reimbursable by the state. So currently, the city, about a year ago, the state gave the city under special legislation, increase our reimbursable rate. Traditional has been about 33% for renovation work, and new construction is about 22%. So our current rate has been up to 60% of reimbursement. So it's substantially higher than what we typically get in the past. This is good for the next 24 more years. So given that the state does not reimburse the city for repair and replacement, recently, last year, the state implemented a program for HVAC indoor air quality improvement project that are subject to reimbursement. So again, some of these projects typically we do not get reimbursement, are eligible under this special program to get reimbursement. And for the city, it's 60%. So this grant application came out last year. because of the requirements very complicated and lengthy, there's only a few communities that actually got received the grant approval. So they reissued this again as of beginning of September. But we were aware that they are going to reissue this grant application process. So starting in May of this year, we start looking at it. So in anticipation of this program coming out for the second time. Some of the basic requirements are, it's probably very time consuming to do. One thing is that they need a preliminary conceptual design. So we have to go out and hire a mechanical engineer to look at the stuff ahead of time. And with those design and conceptual design, we have to get a professional cost estimate. So they want to get a pricing of how much everything costs as part of this grant application. The third item they request it's a allocation of the city's share of the project, which is 40%. So they reimburse the 60%, so the city come with 40%. So we need a pre-approval of 40% of the projects. And the last one is the Board of Education needs to approve a special the education specification for the application. So generally speaking, those are the 4 items. So the state issued this grant application process beginning of September, and the deadlines was December 31st of this year. So knowing the schedule now, we had actually started this process since in May to hire the architect, do cost estimating, and we developed a schedule to potentially get special appropriation for these projects. So with anticipated going to Common Council approval to apply, as well as a special appropriation approval in December. The 6 projects are listed. Brian McMahon High School, it's replacing the chiller unit because they only have one there. There's no spare. So we ran into problem last couple of years, and also that the physical education wing, the gym, and plus other associated area does not have air conditioning. So Brian McMahon is actually our emergency shelter facility. So having that area to be air conditioned, it's a long-term goal. So we want to take this opportunity to request it. The dollar amount is all listed in my backup memo, so I don't want to go through it, so you can look it up. The second project, Brookside School. Brookside School is one of our earlier air conditioning schools. It's renovated back, I believe, was 1997. So the equipment is probably 23, so it's 26 years old. So it is in dire repair and replacement. So that's one project we're looking at. Marvin School is another one. Marvin School is also an earlier air conditioning school for the city of Norwalk, and the equipment need to be replaced. They've been having a lot of problem with it. So that's another project. The fourth one is the Silvermine boilers. We need new boilers for Silvermine School. And then the last 2 projects is actually new air conditioning for Naomi School and Rowayton School. Rowayton School is very complicated because of multiple additions and on and on. So that's one of the second highest price project, I believe, when looking at those numbers. So all those costs projected costs are all listed, and we also provided the 40% cost to for each one of those projects to the city. At this point, we're looking. Let me just jump back a little bit. So the city, from the city and Board of Ed's relationship wise, the city and working with Board of Ed, we're looking at the major school renovation and development project, which is our 25-year plan. We've been looking at that. Those are the projects that cost 40, 60, 80 million dollar kind of thing. So we're looking at evaluating which project to come up in the next 25 years. So we do an assessment on those right now. These projects that we're looking at, it's more like a mid-range project. They range from, like, let's say $2-3 million to $8 million or so. These are mid-range projects that the Board of Ed will be requesting this project in the next few years to improve the facilities. And they also have the smaller project, which is the $500,000 to $1.5 to $2 million kind of project, which they have in terms of remediation, boiler repair, replacement, and some of the smaller items. So this group of 6 projects, it's going to be on our Board of Ed's capital budget project next, I say, 3 to 5 years. So we are taking this opportunity to apply for this state grant. Hopefully that they may approve 2 or 3 or whatever it may be, that we can capture some reimbursement, 60%, instead of city carrying the full load of it. So if the Board of Ed requests these projects in the next 3 to 5 years, some of these really have to be done because the system is failing. So so this is an opportunity that we want to try to capture. The difference between the first four projects, which is Brian McMahon, Brookside, Marvin, and Silver Mine. These are all existing equipment and facilities, so they really all replacement. The one at Nailmick and Wayne School are going to be new. So we're looking at full air conditioning system for those buildings. I know that recently, last few years, the board has requested air conditioning projects. Those projects are basically with window units and split units, so that it's really a shorter term improvements. So last between 10 to 15 years. So they're not really central systems. So what we're proposing is for Rowayton and for Naomi, it's actually a full upgrade. That's why they're so expensive. I think I gave everybody a lot of information, but you know, if you have questions for me, I think one of the strategy I have from a financial perspective is that assuming the board estimate and through the planning and zoning commission and finally to the common council approve this money, I think that the project that receive money for it, if we approve all 6 projects, certain ones that we got state, assuming the state will approve certain project, the other one that does not get approval, we can potentially revert back the money back, cancel those funding for it, because if we don't get the state approval on certain projects, the 40% isn't going to be enough to do those projects anyway. So there's something to consider. So we actually tying up money, but for temporary basis, so that we can apply for the grant. So the project to get the granting, get the grant approval, then we use our money to match the grant. However, the project that is not going to get grant approval, then I believe, I don't know what the finance strategy may be, kind of, or the board estimates strategy is, maybe we just revert those money back and then let those projects stand alone as part of a normal capital budget process for consideration in the future.
Thank you, Alan. Questions for Alan? Ann?
First off, I think this is a terrific program, and I hope that we get what you ask for, and I realize that it's a complex process. Second question is, did you consider some alternatives like heat pumps instead of traditional boiler and gas heating? And third is, can we add, would it be expensive to add, and would it be covered, some kind of air filtering system, like an ion system that can mitigate viruses and things like that? So we have something like that in place if there's ever another type of COVID. And fourth, on the fire, is there the opportunity to add other detection? So should there be detection for gas or carbon monoxide? Because a lot of this is now combined together in many consumer systems. I'm just from a consumer standpoint.
You know, when you start speaking, I should roll it down all the questions. So if I miss one, just remind me. The first one is consider heat pumps and all. What we're proposing is replacing existing equipment, but the system doesn't change. So what I'm saying is that if there's a rooftop unit, we're replacing a rooftop unit. So it's a really, from a replacement cost, it's not a system change. So what happened is that let's just say look at your I don't know why I compare with as a homeowner. It's like the source of energy and all that, we're not changing all that, because in order to do geothermal, you actually have to do exterior excavation, drilling, and all that stuff. So if it's a $2 million project, that potentially be a $4 million project. And I think based on the number that I've seen the state approval for, it's not $8 million is substantial for one community. So when all these projects, I don't want to drive the prices up to a point that it's not doesn't increases our risk of not getting any funding.
I understand. A heat pump system is very efficient, and the unit.
Oh,
is-
I'm sorry, you're talking about heat pump. I'm sorry. Yeah, there are certain things that's yes, we will. I think there's certain ones. See, when you look at the Brigham High School, that's a central cooling towers already, right? So it's not as individual heat pumps.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
Marvel-
sorry, I need to interrupt for a minute. I don't mean to be rude, Ann, but we're kind of getting out of our scope. Ours is not to design the HVAC systems or things like that. Ours is to look at the request for capital funding. So are there questions germane to the funding request rather than how it might be implemented?
No, other than the thought of adding, if there was an opportunity, given this reimbursement level, to add additional equipment like filtration or other sensing devices, which potentially might increase the cost, but that's something.
The filtering system is going to be the most up-to-date system, that the filter that we have, what they're designing for, and sensors and all. It is today energy code and everything else that we have to comply with. So we will look at heat pumps. We will look at all that. Depends on what the existing system is set up. If we're just replacing equipment, then the system won't be changed. But if it's that we put a new system in, then those are things that we will consider as part of our projects. Sensors in terms of carbon monoxide sensors and so on, it's all nowadays we're all built into our building management system. So the system actually monitor those things as part of the overall building systems. Those will be incorporated.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you. I guess my only question probably isn't for Alan, but Henry, does $14 million in this appropriation do anything to put the city's, AAA rating at risk with additional borrowing here?
Let me go back, Alan. Is 14 the total of the projects? And we expect and hope to get 60% of that? And we pay 40%?
No, when you add all 6 projects together, it's about $35 million. So the city portion would be around $14 million. But I don't anticipate, well, I shouldn't say it publicly, but openly, but the state chances are won't be approving $35 million for city of Norwalk. So the actual number will be lower than the $14 million, but it will still be a substantial multi-million dollars, that assuming the state approved 3 of the projects. The other thing that we can look at potentially is, I don't want to get into Henry's business, but I think when we look at these projects that's going to come up next few years, maybe the capital budget, in terms of future year capital budgets, board vet ability to get a certain amount of capital budget money from the city may be reduced, because these projects would come up in the next few years anyway. So maybe there's a strategy to look at how we look at these medium-sized capital budget projects that are coming from the Board of Education, because we are taking care of these projects as part of this program.
Right. I would say, Ed, in answer to your question, we currently have $450 million of debt outstanding. And the last time our financial advisor looked at the data, he felt that our limit was 500 million. The last several years, we've borrowed 50 million, 90 million, and 70 million. So what's happening is the amount of every year's capital budget goes up, and we're digging into all of those projects that were previously approved but not yet funded. So I mean, I think the numbers are what they are. The issue with Alan's projects is, since someone else is paying 60%, we're getting much more value for the amount we borrow, but I guess it automatically would prioritize those projects over other projects where there is no matching funds. The real issue is you have, with next year's projects, you're going to have hundreds of millions of dollars of projects that are approved that need funding. And how much does the city want to borrow? Because we're getting very close to the upper limits. So I don't think this specifically is an issue. It's the whole big capital program. Did that answer your question?
Kind of.
Okay.
It's the standard. It's not a problem yet, but it could be dependent upon what else is asked for in the next several months, meetings, etc.
I'm sorry, Ann, I'll give you a second.
Okay.
It's just the reality of the capital projects and the capital budget every year is that we're going to be bumping up against that $500 million limit very quickly, whether or not this 14 is part of it.
Understood. Understood.
My question is, and Henry, you may say it's all in the same, but given these are very large pieces of capital equipment and the manufacturers many times give seller financing. So it's still financing, but it would be like a capital lease or an operating lease. It's still a lease, it's still a debt obligation, but I don't know if that characterization changes.
I would just say 3-4 months ago, we borrowed $70 million at 3.74%. I don't see how any private company with where interest rates are could give us a better deal. So our borrowing is, first of all, it's tax-free, so it's subsidized, and second of all, we're AAA. So we've been able to get as good financing as anyone else could give us. Any private entity, like a vendor, who wants to give us a better rate is subsidizing it. It's they're cutting something, they're adding to the price because they're losing money on that. So I think the real issue is we've got a lot of needs. We also have wants. We have a very long list and we have limited resources. But obviously, if it costs us 14 million and the state is giving us, let me see if I do my math right, 21 million out of the 35, that 21 is a freebie. Or as Alan would say, until they audit at the end and don't give us the total. But the point is, we're getting a reimbursement. So the 14 million that we allocate is stretching further and we're buying more for it.
Yes.
So obviously we look at that and we don't want to leave money on the table. I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, after decades of neglect, our school system, our buildings, if you could check with Alan, they are in need of either complete renovation or just complete replacement. And it's unfortunate, but that's what we're faced with. It come up with pay me now or pay me later. We're trying to do what we can to make sure that our schools are up to date, up to code, and that they're places where teachers can teach and students can learn. But right now, like I said, after decades of neglect, we don't have much choice. We have to do what we can now to make our schools the best they can possibly be, because it's not going to get any cheaper to fix them later on. And to think that in this day and age, some of our students are going to school, and we know how much how much hotter it's getting in June, July, and August when they go to summer school, and May and June, and they're sitting there in a class without any air conditioning whatsoever. To me, that's unacceptable.
Understood, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alan, last clarifying question for me, and I believe you said this earlier, but I want to reiterate it. If the state were to provide something less than $21 million, which is their contribution to this full list, the amount you would request on the city side would drop commensurately. So said another way, if they only funded the top 4 projects here, we would match the fund, we would use funding there, but not proceed with the bottom 2.
Yes, this is how the state does not look at us as one community with 6 projects. It's each one stand on its own.
Yep.
So the action the Board of Estimate and the Common Council would be to 6 separate allocations. Okay, and and we will prepare the state grant application, each one of its own separate action, approving certain specific money to each project. So if the state chooses, I don't know, we don't have an opportunity to prioritize. So they may, out of 6 projects, they may approve 3 of them. So those 3 projects get approved. Then the other 3 projects really doesn't exist. You know,
Understood.
and my suggestion is that with understanding our financial concern and stuff, you know, giving these projects 40% of funding doesn't get the project implemented by ourselves. So I rather would probably just return the money and then let these projects to go onto your regular capital budget so that they can compete like every other project that the city have. So let it stand on its own, and because we're not getting 60% reimbursement. So so at the end of the day, with the city if the board of Ed recommends it, we'd be looking at about $14 million total. But at the same time, the actual expenditure would most likely would be less, because I don't envision the state funding the city $35 million.
Okay. Any final questions for Alan? All right. All in favor of the resolution as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Resolution passes. Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate
you.
the time and the explanation.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we move into other business. Tom, I believe we have the tax collector's report and numbers to start.
Yeah, and I see Lisa on my lower right corner of the screen. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hey, folks. Can you hear me okay?
All good, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Your packet had a report from September, but if it's with your permission, I'd like to give you a little more updated report. We do have our collection numbers through the end of the month of October. So July, August, September, October, 4 months into the fiscal year, we are at 54.81% of our adjusted levy, which is very slightly ahead of where we were last year at the same time period. We wrapped up that adjusted billing with the motor vehicle taxes that we had to send adjusted bills, revised bills for some taxpayers who owed more, some taxpayers who owed less. That billing was payable by October 10th. We got through that. We sent past due notices for real estate and business personal property. We did not send for motor vehicle because our collection was still ongoing. But what we're doing now, we're actually doing 2 major initiatives. The first of which is we're preparing for our second installment billing. The month of November goes by very quickly because it's a short month. We've got a couple holidays in here. Normally I have my billing files to our printer either before Thanksgiving or right after Thanksgiving. I'm hoping this year to get it to them before Thanksgiving, so we get those bills in the mail really early. Last year, both our billings went out a little bit later than we would have liked. Ideally, I'd like to have bills in the mail by the second week of December, but I think it'll be earlier this year. That's our hope. Things are going well in the assessor's office in terms of what they need to do. I depend on them for billing information for the motor vehicle supplemental bills, which are those prorated bills for individuals who newly registered a vehicle after October 2nd, 2022. The current grand list that we're collecting. So that is our major focus right now, is going to be getting that billing out. We also, believe it or not, started work on our tax sale. Our tax sale is scheduled for Monday, July 22nd of 2024. We start working on the sale now in November of 2023. We identified a number of properties that are 3 or more years in arrears. We did not have a tax sale last year, so we're due to have one this year. So that's what we're working on. We're giving people plenty of time to address the situation. It's difficult to get financing at the last minute, so we're trying to give them as much advance notice as we can. The official start of the process won't occur until 2024, until I file my liens in the spring, probably in March. So usually around February, March, April, that's when the official kickoff happens. But the sale is on the calendar, and we have started working on it. We're doing some other enforcement activity as well. We do a wage garnishment. We're going to be working with the health department on health permit revocation or denial. If you have past due business personal property taxes of a year or older, you're not allowed to renew your health permit until you bring your taxes current. So we work very closely with them. We're grateful for their help. All these little things put together enable us to try to have a high current collection rate, which allows you folks to set a lower mill rate, which is tax relief for everybody. So that is basically our philosophy of enforcement. We're sometimes viewed as the bad guys because we're trying to get people to pay bills that they might not want to pay. But the motivation behind it is sincere and genuine and really for the benefit of the whole city. Because if we do have a higher current collection rate, you know it yourselves, when you set that budget, you have less of an amount uncollectible and you can set a lower mill rate. So that's where we're going with all this, just so that the policymakers and yourselves are aware of it going forward, because we do tend to get some blowback when we undertake these types of initiatives. So that's why I come to your meetings. I'm here to answer your questions and to give you as much information before things happen, just so you're prepared.
Thank you, Lisa. Questions or comments for Lisa? Lisa, thank you as always for all the effort you and your small but mighty team perform on behalf of the city. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Tom, where do we go next?
Yeah, the final item is the Oak Hills update, and it feels like we're turning the calendar back a year. We have Joe Andrasco back after quite a while, so it's good to see him. And Joe, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hold on, let me get the agenda up with the update on it on the correct screen. Yeah, so the financials keep basically heading in the right direction for Oak Hills. Rounds are strong. It was a little weak in September. There were a lot of rainy weekends in September, if you remember, and that does hamper the number of rounds that we can they get played there. But overall, that's not really hindering the year so much. Versus budget, we are still up. Operating income is 55,000 over, and we have about 830,000 in unrestricted cash and about a $35,000 reserve, something along those lines, for capital expenditures, which really we don't have any intention of touching. We have a $275,000 capital expenditure budget, a good portion of which has already been outlaid, and that is really coming from our operating cash, the much larger number, the 800,000 number. But we do intend to continue investing in the park, so that accessibility is key, and so that it's just the best product that we can possibly put out there from a open space perspective, from a tennis perspective, and from a golf perspective. And I'll touch on the fourth kind of pillar of it in a second. We have been kind of on track with all of our city payments when our finances are in this sort of shape. It's something that we have committed to, and we will continue to commit to. We did have a little bit of a delay in our fiscal audit. There's no concerns. There's just one thing that needed to change. And so it's not impacting the actual financials at all. It's just accounting. And that will, once that's done and dusted, we'll send it over naturally. But also it'll trigger a 1% of gross annual revenue payment that we make as per our repayment agreement. On kind of just the it makes sense side, the last bullet here, second to last bullet, is about just having our money work for us a little bit smarter. We've got a lot of cash. We're not expecting to use it all this year, and so we put it into some CDs. There's a mention here of $225K in a CD. We actually moved another 225 into a different CD with a different institution. So we don't really run any concentration risk with FDIC insurance limits in case of some extraordinary event, which, however, in March was not all that extraordinary. And then finally, it's not on the page, but we have come to a mutual agreement in principle to go through with the dissolution of our restaurant contract with the current vendor, DDSA. And we are actively exploring other options for that asset, for that physical asset that we have. The restaurant area, the large kitchen that we have, and naturally all of that is going to include the existing services that we have at the halfway house, or the kind of 10th tee place where you can get something during the middle of the round. So we do expect to have that back up and running, something up and running by the start of the season around April. The actual dissolution agreement has not been finalized just yet. There are a couple of items that we want to get through in terms of exactly how it's going to work out, but we do expect that to be done very early in January, first kind of 3rd of January. So say by January 10th, we expect the vendor to be out total. And because it's mutual, they're cooperating with anyone who wants to go in and see it as we go to RFP for new contracts. So we don't think that there's going to be such a delay, and we've built it intentionally to be a turnkey operation for a new vendor that wants to come in. And so that kind of, we kind of had a little bit of prescience to be able to make it that sort of an operation. So that is the kind of high level summary, but I'm happy to respond to any questions folks may have.
Yeah, hi Joe, this is Troy real quick. The course is in great shape. They did a great job. Interesting about the restaurant RFP, you mentioned that's great. Make sure that's the best way to go there. And
yeah,
curious, the receivable on the balance sheet, is that's from them, and they're going to pay that before they exit? I think there's a receivable like 35,000 or something on your balance sheet.
That's actually part of what we're going through in terms of, not to get too deep into details, but yeah, that is effectively that. But there are some assets that DDSA owns that they're going to do basically in an exchange for waiving some of that. And that's also the audit delay, because you can't just account for that magically. Has to be written off as a bad debt. That bad debt is actually pertinent to FY23, covering the audit. And that's actually tying the whole story together, Trey.
Good luck with the new vendor.
Many thanks.
Any other questions or comments for Joe? Joe, thank you, and good to see you again after several.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks everybody.
Any other business anyone would like to raise? Before we adjourn, I wish the mayor and all the candidates tomorrow good luck.
Thank you, sir.
And I remind us all to make sure we do our civic duty and vote.
That is the most important thing. Go out and vote.
With those things said, I move to adjourn. Can I get a second?
Second.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for a productive meeting.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks.